So joining us today is Laila Shadid. She's in New York City, having just flown in from Cairo. And that leads to my first question for you, Laila. And you can make this as simple or as complicated as you like. Where are you from?
That's a very good question. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, and then I went to school in Pennsylvania. But I grew up with very strong Arab American identity. My father, he was Lebanese, and my mom is of Irish origin. But I always felt a lot more connected to the Lebanese side because of my father's work. He was a journalist, foreign correspondent reporting from the Middle East for the New York Times when he passed away, but for many years before that as well. And so I think of myself from Lebanon, but that's really complicated because I didn't spend a lot of time in Lebanon growing up. And so getting older and after graduating from college, I moved back to the Middle East, where my family's from originally. And I still haven't lived in Lebanon as a result of different things, but geopolitical conflict and also where the programs I applied to were based. But I've spent time now in Palestine, in Jordan, about 2 years in Jordan, and now I'm completing my first year living in Cairo. So I would say I'm from Boston, but I'm also very much from the Arab world, and I have discovered what it means to live in the Arab world as an adult.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about each of these places in the Arab world. What were you doing in Jordan? What were you doing in Palestine? What are you doing now in Egypt?
So in Palestine, I was doing a Fulbright scholarship there. I was an English teaching assistant, and I was working at a middle school in Beit Lahem, in Beit Sahur. And I was teaching middle school age, early high school age children. And I was there for about a month and a half, 2 months before October 7th happened. So my Fulbright was the academic year 2023 to 2024. So I arrived in August, and I was really excited to spend the full year there. And then, October 7th happened, and I was teaching that day um, at the school. And I stayed and continued teaching for an entire week before we were evacuated to Jordan. And then I got to Amman like October of 2023, and I continued my Fulbright there. I ended up at a placement working at an NGO, teaching young refugee girls English, but the NGO actually taught them squash. So it's called Squash Streamers, and it's an incredible organization in Amman. And the idea when I first got there of teaching squash to refugees didn't really make a lot of sense. But then as I got closer with the girls and saw how incredible the organization was, I loved being a part of that. And that was a really, really special year for me. I was obviously, like, really heartbroken having, left Palestine, having the expectation of spending an entire year in Palestine. And I was living with, like, a best friend of mine who I'd met the summer before. I did a journalism fellowship with the Pulitzer Center in the summer of 2022 in the West Bank. So it felt like I was coming home, and then I had to leave all over again. I very quickly realized that I was participating in this experience of, like, displacement from a country that I felt really connected to in the Arab world as being a part of, like, a larger shared experience of displacement, which is very common in the Arab world and is something that my own ancestors faced in Lebanon and was the reason that, they had to immigrate to the US, multiple generations ago. And living in Jordan was an incredible 2 years. It's a very stable place to be at, famously, as they love to be known for, is, this beacon of stability in a very tumultuous region. And that is where, for the first time, I actually understood, like, what it meant to live in the Arab world. Because I was there for 2 years, so it wasn't just, like, a 1 year or even 1 semester study abroad. I really developed a life there, and I had a huge community, and that's where I learned Arabic finally, which was my dream since I was a kid and what my father hoped for me and why he sent me to Sunday school when I was a kid. to learn the alphabet and learn how to read and write Arabic. So finally, through CASA, and before that, I was learning conversational Arabic, but then through CASA, I really felt like I gained fluency, even though fluency in Arabic is a myth, as anyone who studied it knows.
And tell us what CASA is. I know
CASA
because I was on it before you, but go ahead.
Yes. So CASA is the Center for Arabic Studies Abroad, and it's a 1 year long fellowship to basically gain fluency in Arabic. And you have to already be at an advanced level of Arabic in reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So they test those four skills, and you learn both Fusha, which is the formal Arabic, and you also learn the spoken dialect, which is Ammiya. So I was really excited to be in Jordan because, I love the Palestinian dialect, and I really wanted to use the Palestinian Jordanian dialect in my work to report on Palestine as a journalist. And so I really wanted to learn specifically the Shami and specifically the Palestinian Jordanian dialect. They're different, and because my Palestinian friends would be mad at me if I said they're the same. But that was I think one of the most formative years of my entire life. And after completing PLASA, I got a job in Cairo very randomly, as things often happen in the Arab world, through a random connection where my aunt DM'd my current boss on Instagram, Amy Malafia, her name is, and she owns a media company in Egypt, and they work across digital media. They have 12 different publications that cover arts and culture in the Middle East and specifically in Egypt, but all over the region. So there's Cairo Scene, there's Scene Noise, Scene Styled, Scene Eats, a travel magazine as well, art and like architecture and design. So she offered me this job as a staff writer there in Egypt for the following year. And I like had never even thought about coming to Cairo. I never thought about living in Egypt. I never thought that that's where life would take me. I was like, I just learned the Jordanian dialect. I cannot learn the Egyptian dialect now. It's way too hard. I refuse. But I felt like there was something there for me. Like I just felt like an energy that I had to follow, and like this was part of my path. And so I accepted the job and I moved to Egypt that summer. So last summer, about a year ago. And this past year, I have been working as an arts and culture reporter, but also still very focused on politics. And every story I write, I make it political, which is what I'm known for in the office. And I'm also very much known for talking about and making everything about Palestine. And I have really been able to speak so much about Palestine, report so much on Palestine through the lens of arts and culture, being in Egypt, because while there is censorship around a lot of topics, living in Egypt as a journalist, Palestine isn't one of them, which is interesting, to a certain extent. But that's been like my past year, and I've been working. I also became a presenter, so I do a lot of work with the video as well, and like have learned the landscape of digital media and how journalism is really, really like quickly transitioning to digital media and social media, you know, with the rise of like short form content becoming a lot more engaging for like our generation. I think that's how a lot of people are like consuming their news. And I want to be a part of that movement because I want to try to, access like the conversations that our generation is having and also influence them. And so that's what I'm learning right now. I definitely haven't gotten there yet. I think that's going to be something I work towards my entire life. But yeah, that's kind of like Egypt for me has been like it's my first full-time job. It's my first time working as a journalist full time, which is something that I didn't know, like, if I could actually do. I think I put a lot of pressure on myself based on, like, how huge the legacy of my father was as a journalist. Like, if I could ever do that too, if I could find my own voice as a journalist. And I think Egypt has represented that for me, like, finally making, like, my own path.
Okay, I want to ask you about two words that you used, but there will be an odd choice because you talked about a lot about politics, about journalism, about travel, but they're really about language. A lot of what you said was familiar to me. I was on the CASA program. I traveled to the countries that you mentioned and so on. But when you talked about your dream of learning Arabic and how excited you were, that's something I've never shared, right? So I learned Arabic because I had to, and it was a tool, and I didn't enjoy it. I like English. And In high school, I tried to learn French and couldn't, and so on. So Arabic was just a chore for me. And it's different for you. But I noticed here are the two words. You didn't teach in Bethlehem. You taught in Bethlehem.
Mm,
You didn't go to a man. You went to a man. Okay.
mhm.
So when you're speaking English, you speak Arabic, at least about Arab locations. So you've taught English in Palestine. You've studied Arabic in Jordan. Talk us a little bit more about your attitude towards language. I mean, as a journalist, you deal with words, but I'm really interested to hear you say about this excitement about language.
Yeah. I never thought so much about language as I did when I was learning Arabic because it requires you to question every single word you use and why, and the synonyms that you're using, and finding the perfect noun or the adjective, because there are so many more to choose from in the Arabic language. And that depth of language is something that I discovered in Arabic is something that doesn't exist in English. You probably have understood that from also studying Arabic, just all of the layers to the language, and it made me love language in every language I know, which is mainly, a little bit of Spanish, but mainly English and Arabic. It made me love language so much more and, appreciate and care for it so much more and choose my own words, even in English, more carefully. But Arabic specifically is, like, I think one of the great loves of my life. It has taught me, like, not only a new mode of communication that reaches so many more people so much more directly, especially as a journalist. Like, when I walk into a room or begin an interview and I speak with someone whose native language is Arabic, when I speak with them in Arabic, even as of like, an American reporter, Arab American reporter, there's that immediate connection between us that breaks down so many walls and so many boundaries and leads to such a deep conversation that would not be able to be had in English, not just because maybe it's their second language, but because those words that they might use to describe themselves and their identity and their story just don't even exist in English. And so I think that's, as a journalist, that is why I believe knowing Arabic is so important if you're reporting on the Arab world, and why I believe every journalist should put in that time and effort to really learn it and to really discover who they are in that language. But that leads me to my other points. Like, I think something I talk about a lot with my friends who speak English and Arabic both is like we each have our own, like, a different personality in different languages. I think I'm a different person in Arabic. The way I speak, my mannerisms, even the topics I choose to discuss are different in Arabic. I feel like a different person in Arabic. And I feel a lot closer to my roots as an Arab woman. Like, it's been the key to my own Arab identity. I think with Arabic, that was the key I used to unlock my Arabness, not for anyone else but myself. Like, that proved to myself that actually I am an Arab woman. And doesn't mean that people who don't speak Arabic can't own their Arab identity, but for me, that was always the missing piece. Like, I couldn't fully consider myself Lebanese or an Arab woman without being able to speak in the language, like, of my people, and speak to people who are also, like, from the Arab world in the language that is most comfortable for them, and that is their native language. And so I think that's why I love Arabic so much. I love the poetry in everyday sentences. You know, I love that when you say good morning, you say like morning of goodness and jasmine and sunshine and light, and like that, translating that into English, like it wouldn't fit in our daily conversations, but Arabic is based around that poetry. And I think that translates to so much of Arab society and culture, and or is the reason that I love, you know, living in the Arab world and, like, living inside of that poetry on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's also really important when you're speaking about the Arab world, like, for example, saying, like, Bethlehem and not Bethlehem, saying Amman and not Amman. I think those small details are really important and also convey a message to any audience you're speaking to anyone who, is from that region or is not, like, that Arabic is and the language is such an important part of the society and culture, and your accuracy in that language is such an important piece of understanding the region and of treating it with respect and of recognizing how unique that part of the world is and the things that and all of the kind of ingredients and aspects of the society that make it what it is. And I think language is a huge part of that.
Okay, so in one way, my experience is the exact same as yours, and in one way is the exact opposite. I have a different personality in Arabic, but in Arabic, I am, Dr. Brown, the American professor, and in English, I'm Nathan. Okay,
Mhm.
so I am just very, very conscious, and that's actually where I disagree with you a little bit about language. English is a very, very rich language, but we use it automatically, unconsciously if we're native speakers. So my
Mhm.
cat had a problem and I was talking to my wife, she's peeing all over the place. I take her to the vet and the cat is urinating, okay?
Yep,
Um, and I'm not doing this consciously. In Arabic, I word choices are conscious, and I'm gonna
definitely.
ask you a little bit about that because, yes, it is true that if you speak Arabic in an Arab context, people will assume some kind of familiarity, you're making some gesture, even if you make a mistake and so on, but they also code you. Right,
Mhm.
and as I've seen this even Palestinians talking to each other recently. One said a word and the other said, "Wait a second, where are you from?"
Yeah.
Meaning essentially, "Oh, are you from Nablus?" Why? I don't know, but suddenly I want to understand who you are. Do you find yourself consciously in Egypt, for instance, speaking with a Palestinian accent or using specific kinds of words or trying to speak with an Egyptian, because Egyptian Arabic not simply has a different, slightly different vocabulary, it has a specific rhythm to it.
Mhm.
Do you make conscious choices like this about how you're presenting yourself?
Definitely, but it's really funny because my Arabic dialect now is neither Lebanese nor Palestinian nor Jordanian nor Egyptian, but a mix of, I would say, all four. And plus, it's learned. It's a learned as my second language. It's a learned language. So people there are things I say people have no idea what I'm saying, and I will continue, but people know that I'm a foreigner, and people pinpoint me as a foreigner right away. أنا باحكي عربي مكسر, I speak broken Arabic, and it makes it very clear right away that I'm not from there, but people, they still appreciate that I'm making the effort to speak Arabic and that I keep going. They find it cute, it's like, "Oh, like, you're so cute that you're speaking broken Arabic and you're, like, Lebanese American living in Cairo, you learned Arabic in Jordan." People don't really get it, but I'm like, I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna even though I'm embarrassed right now, I'm going to persevere through that and keep speaking Arabic because this is very important to me. But absolutely, like, I'm never gonna sound like I'm from any Arab country. Like, I'm never gonna sound like I grew up there, and that's something that, like, I used to be really sad about, and I used to think about how, like, sometimes, especially during Casa and even after, like, when I learn a new word, I repeat it to myself like 25 times to try to get the pronunciation perfectly, which is something my dad actually used to do. And because my mom and my dad, they lived in Cairo together 30 years ago, actually in the same apartment building that I live in now. Well, he did CASA at AUC. So crazy full circle there. But my mom told me, like, my dad used to learn a new word, he used to just repeat it over and over and over again, and because he didn't wanna sound like a foreigner, but of course he always would for the rest of his career. And I think, I'm in a similar position. I'm never gonna sound like a native speaker, but I also think there's, there's a strength within that as well, and I think it allows me to more fluidly switch dialects because there is that expectation I'm not gonna get everything, like, perfect, and so once I kind of let that go, I speak more comfortably and the words kind of come to me more fluidly, but for sure, like, when I'm speaking to my Palestinian friends, I'll speak in a Palestinian dialect. When I'm, speaking to my Jordanian friends, there are certain, like, colloquial words that only they know that I will speak with them. When I'm speaking to Egyptian friends, I also, like, try to integrate the Egyptian dialect a bit in my accent, but at the same time, I still try to maintain my Shami, kind of my Levantine dialect in Egypt as well, because I also really am proud of the fact that I'm from the Levant and want to carry that with me into Egypt. But it's fun to learn different dialects and to see how my my spoken Arabic has become this mix of all of the different places and cultures I've been a part of and friendships I've made. And even within Egypt, there are different dialects in different neighborhoods. And so my friends teach me, like one of my closest friends, he's from Shobra, and he's taught me words that my friends from Tagamma or downtown Cairo have no idea what I'm saying. So like even with it, like I think that shows how kind of varied Arabic is as a language and how it's like a never ending kind of learning process. I don't know if I answered the question.
You did. I mean, and my experience with Egypt is almost everything boils down to class,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So
very
a
true.
Schubert word, wait, what are you doing? You're an
Exactly.
American. What are you doing talking like somebody from a lower middle class or working class neighborhood? Let me switch a little bit to how you're using words now. You're a journalist, right? So
Mhm.
with your father's generation, I know what that meant, right? He wrote for the Washington Post, he wrote for the New York Times, he wrote in prestige newspapers, he wrote newspaper articles. They were delivered on my doorstep. I don't know what a journalist is now. So tell me, what is it for you? What do you mean when you say I'm a journalist?
It's a really good question, and one that I really need to answer to try to figure this out and articulate for myself. Um, because journalism, anyone can be a journalist now on Instagram. And I think because so much of journalism and news is transitioning to the digital and social media sphere, there isn't that same training that people used to have and they required to get to a place where they could write for a publication like the New York Times. Like there's a lot of independent media now. There are a lot of people who are kind of towing that line between influencer and journalist and activist. And maybe I'm within that, honestly. But I think how I think of journalism is someone right now who is like really, really committed to telling stories. And I think storytelling can take many different forms. I used to just see journalism as this really kind of formal, quote unquote, objective, because I don't think any kind of journalism can ever be fully objective, but that, like, striving for that objectivity and that kind of foreign correspondence that my dad used to do for publications like the New York Times. I saw that as like the golden standard of journalism. But I think, especially since the genocide in Gaza, like people have lost a lot of trust in these Western media outlets, especially, publications like the New York Times, which my dad worked for. And I think that has changed where people look for their news and who they trust and is, slowly shattering kind of all of the legitimacy that has held up certain publications for so long. And so it's opening up this space for so many more people to call themselves journalists. But at the same time, like not everybody has a background in journalism or has like learned the AP style or has been in a newsroom before or has had these kind of traditional experiences with journalism. It doesn't mean that they're not journalists, but it also means that they're coming from a different understanding of what journalism means that is more about like, at least in the spaces I work on, like Instagram and social media, is more about like telling their perspective, or like they might not have a lot of oversight, you know what I mean? They're kind of doing this on their own, becoming like their own publication. If they have like 10,000, a million followers, like you can reach a lot of people and you don't necessarily have like that newsroom around you to bounce ideas off of, to kind of like go through that editorial process that like we, people who have been and experienced old school journalism would like think is necessary to be able before they publish a story or like put something out there. But I think for me, like how I see journalism and how I see my role in journalism is telling stories about the Arab world that aren't otherwise going to be told. And I specifically have focused on Palestine because I believe that there are so many stories from Palestine that need to be told and that don't fit like dominant Western narratives of Palestine, especially when it comes to arts and culture and the incredible like arts and culture scene, thriving scene that exists there and also in the diaspora. And I think looking at right now, especially like looking at the Arab world through the lens of arts and culture, becomes so it makes the region a lot more accessible for people who might not otherwise engage with it. And I feel like that right now is my role in journalism, living in Cairo, working in the arts and culture space, and also constantly looking for new formats to engage people, whether it be video, whether it be writing, maybe podcasting. I haven't really tried that yet, but I'm excited to be doing that now. But I'm always trying to talk to people about this question of what is journalism, where is journalism going, to better understand my own place in it and also get ideas from other people on like how who are they talking to? Who are your mentors? Who's like telling you like the right path ahead? And I'm definitely, I'm thinking about that on a daily basis and not always quite sure what my own place in it is, but I know that I love to tell stories and I know that I love to speak to people and I know that everyone has a story and right now like it's so so important that we see the stories of Palestinians and we see the stories of people in Lebanon and we see the stories of people in the Arab world who are doing amazing things and like, persevering, continuing to create identity and art in a region where like oftentimes the headlines are dominated by stories of war and conflict.
Okay, I've got one last question, and it's actually about your dad. Because when we set up this interview, I didn't realize you were Anthony Shadid's daughter. Okay. And I read Anthony Shadid a lot. And what struck me about his journalism at the time was, okay, we can call it old school. Yes, he was writing for the Post and then the New York Times. And he wrote as a traditional journalist did about sort of political stories, what the Lebanese government is doing, what the response of of Israeli policy is, what's going on in Egypt, and so on. There was always a human dimension. He was writing about people in a way that was really unusual. And I can't say you anything specific, but it always seemed to permeate his work. I only met him once, and that was in Cairo when it was Egyptian revolution. Everybody's in Cairo. Everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. And like most journalists, he was a good listener. He was curious, but he was also, there was just something about him that sort of struck me, a little bit of humility and warmth. He wasn't a dominating presence. He was there to kind of sit and observe in a way that was, I think, even more curious and more broadly curious, I would say, than most journalists. And so it strikes me the way that you're talking. You mentioned mentors. And here's a difficult question. Your father passed away more than a decade ago before you even started on this. Is he a mentor for you still?
It's a great question, and, I love that you met him, and I love that you met him in Cairo, and I love that that's where I call home now, and as you've probably heard through the narrative that I've told you about my last 3 years and my, ambitions as a journalist, that, like, my dad is my main mentor, and he always will be, and I've followed his path, so closely for these few years to the point where, I've driven myself crazy with questions about who he was and what he was doing in his life, and sometimes wondered if it's even healthy to be living in the same apartment building that he lived in 30 years ago. But of course, he is my main inspiration and he always will be. And the legacy that he left behind for journalists, and for people everywhere, and just that kind of attention to human stories and that humility that he brought to journalism and to coverage of the Arab world is something that, obviously I learn about every single day, but that this field will never forget and will always have been changed by. And it's so funny because I honestly, like, I feel that he's guiding my path every day. Like, I meet people who knew him and who sat down with him and who had, you know, emotional conversations with him or just really incredible interactions that stayed with them forever, like, all the time. Like, it's like, I wanna say, like, it's so surprising that you met him, but, like, it's not because I feel like I meet people who knew him all the time, and it makes me just feel like, at the beginning of living in the region and becoming a part of this world of young, Arab journalists or people who are, just focused on this field. And like I would meet people all the time who knew him, and I was like, wow, like every time I was like, this is crazy. I can't believe it. And now I'm just like, yeah, this is him. Like he's guiding me and he's with me and he's showing me that like I'm on the right path and that like I just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when I feel so disillusioned by the field of journalism or so overwhelmed by all of the different possibilities, like all the different paths I could possibly take, or I'm down on myself about not like knowing the region as well as I should. Like I use him as kind of like my guide. And I think right now I'm in this really like pivotal kind of part of my path and my career that I kind of mentioned like for me, Kyra has been my pivot away from just following his path. Like I'm finding my own path now too, that he has made possible by like helping me get to this point and getting me to Cairo. And I felt like that was also a big reason I chose Cairo because that was like where my dad actualized as a journalist and as a person. Like he had his first job, real journalism job for the AP in Cairo through his 20s. And that's where he learned so much, about the language, about himself, about what it meant to be Arab in the Arab world. So I'm on a very similar path. And I think that I'm really excited actually. There's a book coming out in the next year or so called The Last Correspondent, written by Phil Bennett and Steve Fainaru. One was his editor, and the other was a really close colleague of his and also a journalist. And I think it's going to be an incredible piece of work that a lot of young journalists can read to kind of understand what I have about the importance of human stories and of focusing on people constantly in your narrative and focusing on how these larger geopolitical conflicts and dynamics affect people's day-to-day lives and affect even you know the people like that maybe you would never expect to be the ones you take quotes from. Those become your most important sources and are the sources that my dad used to base his entire stories around and would actually paint the picture of what's happening in a region that we find so complicated, especially in the US, really clarifies things for people to see, those real human stories that they can connect with. And I'm really excited for this book to come out because it's going to be like an account of his life and his journey and his reporting in Baghdad and on the Arab Spring in Cairo and then, everything in between. But yeah, I think I can't wait to see through this book also my father become a mentor for this generation of journalists because obviously like the people that were closer to his time, maybe 10 years younger than me, they all still remember him. But like people in my generation don't really know him as well, like who are in their 20s, who are just starting their careers. So I really hope that his legacy continues in my generation as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. Um,
Thank you so much for having me.
you almost made me cry, and that's hard. Yes. Yeah, especially about your dad. Like I say, I only met him once, but it was just. I'm not surprised if he didn't become a journalist. He could have probably become a psychotherapist. There was just something
Yeah,
about him that was like warm
absolutely.
and inviting, and I don't even remember anything he said. I just remember thinking, I'm in the presence of a good man.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. That made
Okay.
me almost cry.
All right.